He lost his sight in a car accident, but 2 weeks later, his vision came back. Instead of telling anyone, the billionaire made a terrifying decision to pretend he was still blind. That's when his fiancée began stealing his company. His best friend started planning his downfall. And the maid, she showed him the purest love of his life, believing he could never see it. Stay till the end, because when he finally removes the glasses, her reaction will change everything. Before we begin, like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from, because this story proves that sometimes pretending not to see shows you everything that matters. 3 days passed after the accident before Malcolm Walker finally opened his eyes. The hospital room was quiet, too quiet. Machines hummed softly. Shoes moved carefully across tiled floors. Doctors spoke in cautious tones, as if sound itself could make things worse. They expected fear, pain, confusion, but Malcolm said nothing. He lifted one hand toward his face, blinked slowly, then whispered the words that froze everyone in the room. "I can't see." Doctors moved fast. Lights flashed. Fingers waved. Questions fired in quick succession. Nothing. The diagnosis came carefully measured. Temporary loss of vision, possibly reversible, but with no promises. For days, Malcolm lived in complete darkness. No light, no shapes, no faces, just the sound of his daughter Ella crying softly somewhere near the doorway, and the heavy realization that everything he had built might now slip from his grasp. Then, on the day he was discharged, something changed. The car ride back to his mansion was silent. Tires rolled over smooth asphalt. The city passed unseen, until the darkness cracked. First came shadows, then blurred outlines, then clarity. Malcolm Walker could see again. And instead of relief, instead of joy, a different thought settled into his mind, cold, precise, dangerous. For months, things inside his company had felt wrong. Documents vanished. Meetings happened without him. Decisions were made behind closed doors. He had sensed betrayal but never had proof. Now, suddenly, everything made sense. If everyone believed he was blind, if they thought he was vulnerable, they would finally stop hiding. Still seated in the car, Malcolm made a decision that would change everything. He would say nothing. He would pretend the darkness never lifted. He would let silence expose the truth. 2 weeks later, Malcolm Walker returned to his empire wearing dark glasses and holding a cane. Once feared, once untouchable, now pitied. Employees lowered their voices when he passed. Conversations ended abruptly. Files disappeared from desks. And Malcolm saw it all. He saw his closest friend and business partner, Kaysen, pause mid-sentence whenever he entered the room. He saw hesitation in his staff's movements. And worst of all, he saw his fiancée, Maya, exchange looks with Kaysen that had nothing to do with business. They thought he was helpless. They were wrong. The mansion felt colder than ever when he returned home. Too quiet. Too empty. Ella barely spoke now. Her laughter, once bright, had faded into silence. That was when the agency sent Isabel. A quiet, soft-spoken live-in housekeeper. Gentle hands. Tired eyes. She was told only one thing. The boss is blind. He needs patience. And discretion. Isabel accepted without hesitation. The first time she saw Malcolm, she stopped in her tracks. Not because of the wealth, not because of the power, but because he looked broken. And without knowing why, without planning to, she made a quiet decision of her own. She would take care of him. She would protect him, even if he never knew. If this opening hooked you, like this video, subscribe, share it, and comment where you're watching from, because what's about to come next reveals secrets no one is ready for. The mansion had rules. They weren't written anywhere, but Isabel felt them the moment she stepped fully into Malcolm Walker's world. Mornings were quiet. Footsteps were measured. Nothing was ever moved without purpose. On her first full day, she walked the long halls slowly, learning the rhythm of the house the way one learned a language by listening before speaking. The kitchen came first. Malcolm liked his coffee strong, no sugar, always placed on the right side of the table. Breakfast at exactly 7, not a minute earlier, not a minute late. The living room stayed untouched unless requested. The study was off limits unless summoned. Ella's room? That one felt different. Softer. Warmer. like a place that had once been full of laughter and was now waiting for it to return. Isabel learned quickly. She had always learned quickly. Life had taught her that if you wanted to stay, you adapted. Malcolm watched her do it, from behind dark glasses, from the corner of his vision, from a stillness that fooled everyone but himself. He noticed how she memorized his steps, how she counted them quietly when guiding him through narrow spaces, how she never rushed him, never spoke too loudly, never treated him like something fragile. But he also noticed something else. She treated him like he was human. Malcolm remained distant, guarded. His words were brief, his tone neutral. He asked for things without warmth, and thanked her without inflection. To anyone else, it might have seemed cold. Isabel didn't mistake it for cruelty. She saw the tension in his jaw when voices rose in the hallway, the way his shoulders stiffened when Kaysen entered the room, the quiet pause before he answered questions that once would have come easily. He was a man holding himself together with discipline alone, and somehow, without meaning to, Isabel began doing small things, private things, things she believed he would never see. One afternoon, as Malcolm stood by the window, facing the light he pretended not to notice, Isabel stepped closer to straighten his jacket before a meeting. Her fingers brushed his collar. Just once. "Your tie's crooked," she murmured softly, more to herself than to him. She fixed it carefully, then stepped back, heart racing. Malcolm didn't move, didn't speak, but his reflection in the glass caught everything, the gentleness, the hesitation, the way her hand lingered for half a second too long. Later that evening, when she passed him in the hall carrying folded laundry, she smiled without thinking. A small, genuine curve of her lips, meant for no one at all. He couldn't see it. So she let herself smile. And when she thought she was alone, truly alone, she did something that surprised even her. She lifted her hand and blew a tiny kiss into the empty space behind him. Ridiculous, foolish, harmless. Or so she thought. Malcolm stood still until her footsteps faded. Then he exhaled slowly. A breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He saw everything. Every smile. Every careful touch. Every whispered word meant for a man she believed lived in darkness. And that was the problem. He had spent years around people who smiled for gain, who touched for leverage, who spoke kindness only when it served them. This was different. This was unguarded. It made something inside him shift, subtle, dangerous, unwelcome. He told himself to stay in control. Isabel was an employee. He was pretending to be blind. This was already complicated enough. But control became harder with each passing day. Ella noticed Isabel before Malcolm admitted he had. At first, it was small things. Ella lingering in doorways when Isabel cleaned nearby, sitting at the kitchen table longer than necessary, watching her hands move as she worked. Then came the laughter, soft at first, almost shy. Isabel hadn't meant to make her laugh. She had simply dropped a spoon, startled herself, and laughed at her own clumsiness. The sound echoed. Ella laughed too. It was the first time Malcolm had heard that sound in weeks. He froze where he stood, cane resting against the floor, heart tightening unexpectedly. Later, Isabel baked with Ella not because it was part of her job, but because Ella asked. Flour dusted the counter. Chocolate chips disappeared mysteriously. Ella smiled with a brightness that felt unfamiliar in the house. Malcolm sat in his study, pretending to read, listening to every sound, the clatter, the giggles, the life. That night, as Isabel tucked Ella into bed, Malcolm paused outside the door. "I like her," Ella said quietly, her voice drifting down the hall. Isabel froze. "You do?" "She smiles at me," Ella replied, "and she listens." Malcolm closed his eyes. Something inside him cracked, not painfully, but like ice finally breaking under sunlight. Hope felt like a dangerous thing. He had learned long ago not to trust it. The next morning, Isabel placed Malcolm's coffee in front of him, hands steady despite the way her pulse jumped whenever she stood too close. "Good morning, Mr. Walker," she said softly. He nodded. As she turned to leave, she hesitated, then leaned closer. "You have a meeting today," she whispered. "Careful, kind." He didn't need reminding, but the concern in her voice lingered long after she walked away. Later, passing him in the corridor, she adjusted the sleeve of his jacket again, more confidently this time, and when she reached the end of the hall, thinking herself unseen, she smiled. Malcolm watched, And this time, he didn't look away. The internal war grew louder with each moment. This wasn't attention-seeking. It wasn't manipulation. It wasn't curiosity. It was affection given freely without expectation, and that terrified him. Because affection like that didn't stay small. It grew. It rooted itself. It changed things. That evening, as the mansion settled into quiet, Malcolm stood alone by the window once more, dark glasses still in place. For the first time since the accident, since the betrayal, since the silence closed in around him, he felt warmth instead of suspicion, and that was when he realized the truth. Isabel's kindness wasn't meant to be seen, which meant it was real, and that made it the most dangerous thing of all. If you're feeling this slow burn tension, don't forget to like, subscribe, share this story, and comment where you're watching from, because what's about to come next will test loyalty, courage, and love in ways no one is ready for. The office door wasn't fully closed. Isabel noticed it by accident, just a thin line of light slicing through the quiet hallway as she passed with a basket of folded linens balanced against her hip. She would have kept walking. She should have, but then she heard Malcolm's voice. Low, measured, calm in a way that made people lean closer when he spoke. She slowed. Another voice followed Kaysen's. Smooth. Familiar. Too careful. Then a third. Maya. Her laugh came softly through the crack. Sweetened and deliberate. The way it always was when she wanted something. Isabel stopped moving altogether. She told herself it wasn't her business. That she was only the housekeeper. That eavesdropping was a line she shouldn't cross. But something in her chest tightened. Just today. Kaysen was saying. If we wait any longer, it complicates things. A rustle of paper. Isabel's fingers curled around the basket. What about the signatures? Maya asked lightly. He's been distracted lately. He'll sign, Kaysen replied. He always does. Malcolm's chair creaked. I trust you, Malcolm said. The words landed heavy in Isabel's stomach. Maya's tone softened. Of course you do, she purred. You don't even need to read it. Isabel's breath caught. She knew that tone. It wasn't business. It was something else, something intimate and practiced. She edged closer, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the thin opening in the door. Inside, papers lay spread across Malcolm's desk. Thick ones. Official. The kind that carried weight, urgent signatures. Isabel didn't understand the language on the pages, but she didn't need to. The way Maya leaned in. The way Kaysen stood too close. The way Malcolm sat there, dark glasses on, pen poised but unmoving. They were using him. Because they thought he couldn't see. A wave of heat rushed through Isabel's body, fear first, then anger, sharp and unwelcome. She backed away quietly, the basket trembling in her hands. That night, sleep refused to come. Isabel lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her small room, the house silent around her. Malcolm's words echoing over and over in her mind. I trust you. She needed this job. She needed the stability. She needed the money. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw those papers sliding across the desk. She saw Malcolm signing something he couldn't read. She couldn't let that happen. Morning came too quickly. The mansion woke in its usual order, lights on, doors opening, footsteps measured. Isabel moved through the kitchen on autopilot, preparing breakfast with hands that shook just enough to betray her nerves. Coffee first. She poured it carefully into the pot, the rich scent filling the room. Malcolm liked it strong, almost bitter. She set out toast, sliced fruit, arranged everything just so. By the time Malcolm entered, cane tapping lightly against the floor, Isabel had forced her expression into calm. Good morning, Mr. Walker, she said. He nodded and took his seat. Moments later, voices echoed in the entryway. Kaysen, Maya. They entered like they owned the place. We need a few minutes, Kaysen said, already pulling out a chair. Isabel stayed. She wiped the counter slowly, deliberately, pretending to be invisible. The folder appeared on the table. Thick, crisp, new. This is the final copy, Kaysen said. Just a few signatures. Malcolm took the pen. Isabel's pulse roared in her ears. You trust us, don't you? Maya asked softly. Yes, Malcolm replied. That was it. Isabel moved without thinking. She reached for the coffee pot, lifted it as if to refill a cup, then stepped forward and stumbled. The pot tipped. Dark liquid poured across the table, soaking the papers in seconds. Ink bled. Pages warped. Words vanished beneath spreading stains. Oh my God! Isabel gasped. I'm so sorry. Maya shrieked. Are you insane? She snapped, jumping back. Do you know what you just did? Kaysen stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. Those were important documents. Isabel grabbed a cloth, hands shaking for real now, and began wiping the table, smearing the ink further, making sure nothing could be salvaged. I didn't mean to, she repeated. Please let me clean this. Get away from that, Maya shouted. Kaysen snatched the papers, then froze when he saw them ruined beyond use. Malcolm sat still, silent, his head tilted slightly, as if listening, as if watching. We'll bring another copy, Kaysen said through clenched teeth. This one's useless. Maya shot Isabel a look sharp enough to cut. This is why staff shouldn't be trusted, she hissed. They left without another word, anger crackling in the air behind them. Isabel stood frozen, cloth in hand, heart racing. She waited for Malcolm to speak. He didn't. He rose slowly, cane tapping once, then left the kitchen without looking back. Isabel's legs felt weak. She had crossed a line. She knew it. By afternoon, the call came. Mr. Walker would like to see you in his office, the secretary said politely. Isabel's stomach dropped. She straightened her uniform, wiped her palms against the fabric, and walked upstairs with measured steps. The office door opened. Malcolm sat behind his desk, dark glasses in place, hands folded calmly in front of him. You spilled coffee on important documents, he said. Her voice trembled. I'm so sorry, sir. It was an accident. Silence stretched. Then, I want to offer you a new position. Isabel blinked. I what? I need someone full-time. Malcolm continued evenly. Someone who lives here, oversees the household, assists me, looks after my daughter. Her heart pounded. You've proven yourself. Capable, he added. She swallowed. Yes, sir. I'd be honored. There's a condition, he said. Of course there was. Discretion, Malcolm said. Silence. Loyalty. Isabel met his gaze, dark glasses hiding everything, revealing nothing. I can do that, she said. Malcolm nodded once. You may go. She left the office in a daze, relief and unease twisting together inside her. She had saved him. But she had also stepped into something far larger than she understood. As Malcolm sat alone, a faint curve touched the corner of his mouth. An almost smile. Isabel stayed, not knowing she had just chosen sides, and not knowing the war had already begun. If this chapter kept you on edge, like subscribe, share, and comment where you're watching from, because what's about to come next will push courage, loyalty, and love to their breaking point. After the coffee incident, nothing returned to normal. Not the air in the mansion. Not the way footsteps echoed through the halls. Not the way Isabel slept at night. One ear always open, heart always racing. Kaysen and Maya came back. They always did. Their visits grew more frequent, more urgent. Every time they arrived, Isabel felt at first like a tightening in her chest, a warning she had learned to trust. Folders appeared again, voices lowered, doors closed. And every time, Isabel found a way to be there. She invented reasons that sounded innocent enough. Mr. Walker, there's a delivery at the gate. Sir, the electricity flickered in the west wing. I think the stove might be overheating. She interrupted meetings under the guise of duty, her pulse pounding so loudly she was sure they could hear it. Once, when Maya and Kaysen were seated across from Malcolm with documents spread neatly between them, Isabel burst into the room breathless, eyes wide. The fire alarm is going off in the kitchen, she said. I smell smoke. There was no smoke, but alarms screamed through the house. Seconds later, Isabel had pulled the manual switch in the hallway. Chaos followed. Kaysen cursed. Maya glared. Staff rushed in every direction. Malcolm remained seated, calm and composed, Kane resting against his chair as Isabel took his arm and guided him toward the garden. Thank you, he murmured as they stepped into the open air. Her fingers tightened around his sleeve. I'm sorry, she whispered. I really thought. It's all right, he said. The words were simple, but the way he said them told her he knew, and that frightened her almost as much as it comforted her. Each act of sabotage brought her closer to the edge. She knew it. Maya's eyes followed her more closely now. Kaysen's patience wore thin. Their smiles sharpened into something brittle and dangerous. Isabel could feel the risk coiling around her like a tightening rope. One wrong move and she'd be gone. But she couldn't stop. Because every time she stood between them and Malcolm, she saw the relief in his stillness, the trust he never spoke aloud. And somewhere in the middle of that danger, something unexpected happened. Ella began to wait for her. Not with words, with presence. Isabel would find her sitting quietly at the kitchen table while she baked, small hands folded, eyes watching intently. "Can I help?" Ella asked one afternoon, voice hopeful. Isabel smiled and handed her a spoon. They baked cookies that day, chocolate chips scattered everywhere, flour dusting the counters and their clothes alike. Ella laughed when Isabel pretended to scold the oven for taking too long. They played games on the floor afterward, puzzles and card decks spread between them. Ella talked. About school, about missing her mother, about how quiet the house felt. Isabel listened. That alone seemed to change something. Malcolm noticed. From the hallway, from the stairs, from behind doors left just slightly open, he watched Ella light up in ways he hadn't seen since before the accident. Since before grief had taken up permanent residence between them. One evening, Isabel found Ella curled up on the couch, knees tucked to her chest. "I had a bad dream," Ella whispered. Isabel sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her small shoulders. "It's okay," she murmured. "I'm here." Ella leaned into her without hesitation. From the doorway, Malcolm closed his eyes. Something inside him loosened just enough to hurt. Later that night, as Isabel tucked Ella into bed, Malcolm passed quietly down the hall. "I wish she could stay forever," Ella whispered. The words struck him harder than any accusation ever could. He stood there long after Isabel left the room, the echo of his daughter's voice settling deep in his chest. The mansion changed slowly. It wasn't louder. It wasn't smaller, but it felt warmer. Meals lasted longer. Laughter appeared unexpectedly. Ella stopped retreating into silence, and Malcolm, despite himself, began to linger. He paused near the kitchen, stood in the doorway during baking, listened to conversations he once would have ignored. All the while, Isabel continued risking everything. Another alarm, another interruption, another ruined attempt by Maya and Kaysen. And each time, Malcolm allowed it. Deliberately. Because every act confirmed what he already suspected. This wasn't business. This was something darker. And Isabel brave. Reckless Isabel was standing alone between him and it. That night, Malcolm sat in the quiet living room long after everyone else had gone to bed. He removed his glasses and stared into the dimness. For the first time since his sight returned, he wondered if pretending not to see was enough, because the danger was growing. And so was his attachment to Isabel, to the fragile peace she had created, to the family that was slowly rebuilding itself around her. If the betrayal went deeper than business, then Isabel might be the only one on his side, and that realization changed everything. If you feel the tension building, like, subscribe, share, and comment where you're watching from, because what's about to come next will expose truths no one can hide from. Isabel stopped sleeping. Not the way normal people did anyway. She lay still in the narrow bed of the servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling long after the mansion had gone quiet, replaying moments over and over until they blurred together the urgency in Kaysen's voice, Maya's careless laughter, the way documents kept appearing like ghosts that refused to stay buried. This wasn't just theft. She knew that now. The realization had crept in slowly, settling in her bones like cold. The morning after another interrupted meeting, Isabel found herself standing outside Malcolm's office long after he'd left for a doctor's appointment. The door was unlocked. Her hand hovered over the handle. She had crossed lines before. This would cross all of them. But if she didn't act, she might be watching a man walk blindly into his own destruction. Isabel stepped inside and closed the door softly behind her. The office was immaculate, too immaculate. Papers aligned, pens straightened, no clutter, no chaos, which meant the chaos had been hidden. She moved carefully, heart pounding, opening drawers she had cleaned 100 times before but never inspected. The first two held nothing but old contracts and personal files. The third drawer stuck. She tugged gently. It slid open to reveal a thin folder marked with a single word in red ink. Transfer. Her breath caught. Isabel opened it. The language was dense, legal, deliberately confusing, but even she could understand enough to feel sick. Ownership shifts, emergency authority clauses, signatures required due to medical incapacity. They weren't just siphoning money, they were taking everything. She photographed every page with shaking hands, returned the folder exactly as she'd found it, and slipped out of the office just as footsteps echoed down the hall. That night, she didn't hesitate. She called the number Helen, the neighbor's cook, had slipped her weeks earlier, just in case. A lawyer answered. They met the next day in a quiet cafe far from the mansion. Isabel's hood pulled low, nerves buzzing. The man read the documents in silence, his jaw tightening with each page. "This is bad," he said finally. "How bad?" Isabel asked. He looked at her carefully. "Fraud, at the very least. Corporate theft. Abuse of medical authority." Her chest tightened. "Is that all?" He hesitated. "There's something else," he said slowly. "This clause here. It only activates if the accident incapacitated him permanently." Isabel's blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "I mean," the lawyer said quietly, "someone planned for that crash to work." The words felt unreal. He continued, voice low. "And if what you're suspecting is true, if there are witnesses paid off, records altered, mechanical failures hidden, then this isn't just financial crime." Isabel couldn't breathe. This would be attempted murder. She left the cafe numb, the city moving around her like a dream she couldn't wake from. Back at the mansion, she locked herself in the pantry and cried silently into her hands. Malcolm had almost died. Ella had almost lost her father. The weight of it crushed her. That evening, Isabel did something she'd sworn she wouldn't do. She recorded. She left her phone hidden behind a stack of books in Malcolm's office the next time Maya and Kaysen arrived, heart hammering as she pretended to dust the shelves. She caught fragments at first. Insurance already settled. No one traced the mechanic. He's blind, for God's sake. Then, clear as a blade slicing air. "The brakes were cut," Maya said, laughing softly. "It wasn't complicated," Kaysen chuckled. "We paid the right people. Silence isn't expensive when fear does the rest." Isabel's hands shook as she retrieved her phone later, retreating to her room to listen. Every word confirmed the nightmare. They hadn't just taken advantage of Malcolm's blindness. They'd created it. And Malcolm, pretending not to see, saw the truth unfold piece by piece. He noticed Isabel's pallor, the way she flinched at footsteps, the tension coiled tight in her shoulders. He followed her one night, quietly, as she slipped into the study after midnight. He watched her press play on her phone, tears streaming silently as the voices filled the room. Malcolm closed his eyes. The sound of Maya's laughter burned deeper than the accident ever had. When Isabel finally looked up, she froze. Malcolm stood in the doorway. For a moment, neither of them moved. "I'm sorry," she whispered, panic flooding her face. "I shouldn't be in here, I know," he said softly. Her breath hitched. You know?" He didn't answer directly. He crossed the room slowly, sat across from her, and removed his glasses. "I suspected," he said. "But suspicion isn't proof." Isabel slid the phone toward him with trembling hands. "This is..." He listened without interruption, jaw clenched, hands steady despite the storm raging behind his eyes. When the recording ended, the silence was unbearable. "They planned it," Isabel said hoarsely. "They tried to kill you." Malcolm exhaled slowly. "And they thought they succeeded." The weight of it pressed down on him all at once, the hospital bed, the darkness, Ella's quiet sobs, the doctor's uncertainty. He could have died. His daughter could have been alone. He reached for Isabel's hand before thinking better of it. She didn't pull away. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not looking away." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I didn't know what else to do." "You did exactly what you should have," he replied. That night, Malcolm didn't sleep either. He sat at his desk long after the lights dimmed, replaying the recording, mapping out every move. This wasn't something to confront impulsively. This was war, and wars required strategy. By morning, the plan had begun. A meeting was scheduled. Urgent, private, final. Kaysen and Maya accepted immediately, confidence unshaken. After all, what could a blind man do? Malcolm put on his glasses, picked up his cane, and walked back into the role he'd been playing so well. But this time, the darkness was only theirs. A final meeting is set, and everyone believes Malcolm Walker is still blind. The conference room felt colder than the rest of the mansion. It always had. Glass walls, a long polished table, chairs placed with intention, like pieces on a chessboard. Malcolm sat at the head, dark glasses in place, cane resting against his knee, posture relaxed enough to look harmless. Blind. That's what they saw. Isabel stood near the wall, hands clasped tightly in front of her apron, heart hammering so loud she was sure it could be heard. She had barely slept. Every step leading to this moment felt unreal, like walking toward the edge of a cliff and trusting the ground not to disappear. The door opened. Kaysen walked in first, confidence rolling off him like armor. He didn't bother to hide his smile. Maya followed, elegant as ever, heels clicking softly, eyes already calculating. "Malcolm," Maya said sweetly. "You wanted to see us?" "Yes," Malcolm replied calmly. "Thank you for coming." They took their seats without hesitation. Isabel's stomach twisted. This was it. Kaysen opened his briefcase and spread a new set of documents across the table with theatrical care. "These are just updated versions," he said casually. "Nothing you need to worry about." "Standard procedure." Maya leaned closer to Malcolm, her voice low, intimate. "You trust us, don't you?" Malcolm tilted his head slightly, as if considering the sound of her voice rather than the meaning of her words. "Of course," he said. Isabel's fingers curled into fists. Maya smiled, satisfied. "Then let's not waste time." Kaysen slid the pen into Malcolm's hand, and then, because they believed they had already won, they began to talk. They talked too much. "It's almost impressive, really," Kaysen said with a chuckle. "How smoothly this all worked out." Maya laughed softly. "I told you it would. Accidents happen every day." Isabel's breath caught. Malcolm didn't move. Kaysen leaned back in his chair. "Cutting the brakes was risky, sure. But fear makes people quiet, especially when they're paid well." Maya waved a dismissive hand. "And now the company transfers itself. All perfectly legal. On paper." They laughed together, freely, carelessly, arrogantly. Isabel felt sick. "And he never suspected a thing," Maya continued, her voice dripping with triumph. "Poor Malcolm. Losing his sight made him so manageable." That was when Malcolm slowly placed the pen down on the table. The sound was soft, deliberate, final. The room stilled. Malcolm reached up and removed his glasses. Time seemed to fracture. His eyes clear, sharp, devastatingly focused, lifted to meet theirs. "I was never blind." Silence crashed down like a physical force. Maya's face drained of color. "What?" Kaysen laughed nervously. "That's not funny, Malcolm." Malcolm straightened, the cane untouched beside him. "I saw the documents disappear. I saw the looks you shared. I heard every word you just confessed." Maya stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. "You're lying." Malcolm didn't blink. "I saw everything." Kaysen's breath hitched. His hands trembled. He tried to stand and failed, collapsing back into his chair, face ashen. Maya shook her head violently. No, you couldn't have. You were blind. The doctors said it might be permanent," Malcolm said calmly. "They never said it was." The truth settled over the room like ash. Maya's panic surfaced fully now. "Malcolm, listen. We can explain." "You already did," he replied. He pressed a button beneath the table. The door opened. Security stepped in. Kaysen buried his face in his hands. Maya screamed. Isabel stood frozen, tears blurring her vision not from fear, but from the overwhelming release of everything she'd been holding inside. As Kaysen and Maya were escorted out, Maya's eyes locked on Isabel, hatred burning bright. "This is your fault," she spat. Isabel didn't flinch. The door closed. Silence returned. Different now. Heavier. Cleaner. Malcolm turned slowly toward Isabel. She realized, in that moment, that this was the first time he was truly looking at her. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew you could see." "Yes," her chest tightened. "And you let me. I let you be who you are," he said gently. Isabel swallowed hard. "I thought you couldn't see me. That's why I did those things." "I know." He took a step closer. "I saw you adjust my collar," he said quietly. "I heard you whisper encouragements when you thought I was alone. I saw the kisses you blew into the air. I saw you risk your job, your safety, Tears spilled freely now. "I never did it to be seen," she said, voice breaking. "I didn't want anything. I just couldn't stand watching them hurt you." "I know," Malcolm repeated. He reached out, hesitated, then gently brushed his thumb across her trembling hand. "That's why it mattered." Isabel looked up at him, stunned. "For the first time since my wife died," he continued, voice low and raw, "someone chose me without wanting anything in return." Her breath hitched. "And my daughter," he added softly. "She laughs again because of you." Isabel shook her head. "I didn't plan any of that." "No," he said. "You just showed up. And you stayed." They stood there, close enough to feel each other's breath, neither rushing, neither pulling away. The tension between them wasn't sharp. It was deep. "Earned," Malcolm spoke again, quieter. "Thank you." 2 words. "Sincere." "Unprotected." Isabel broke, then stepping forward, pressing her forehead briefly against his chest, a silent release of everything she'd been carrying. He didn't hesitate this time. His arms wrapped around her, not possessive, not desperate, steady, safe. They stayed like that for a long moment, the world outside the room irrelevant. When Isabel finally pulled back, her cheeks were wet, her smile small and uncertain. "What happens now?" she asked. Malcolm looked toward the window, where the city stretched out beneath them, dangerous, bright, alive. "Justice," he said. Then he looked back at her. "But whatever happens next," he added softly, "you won't face it alone." Isabel's heart swelled. Justice is coming, but love has already won. The fallout came quietly. No press conference. No dramatic headlines splashed across the screens inside the mansion. Just a series of sealed envelopes, late-night phone calls, and lawyers moving through rooms that once held laughter, then secrets, then silence. Malcolm reclaimed what was his. The board votes were swift once the recordings were played. Documents surfaced. Accounts were frozen. Emergency clauses were reversed. Ownership snapped back into place like a bone finally set correctly. Kaysen and Maya were arrested without spectacle. No speeches, no pleas that mattered. They were escorted out of their lives the same way they had tried to end Malcolm's cold, efficient, irreversible. And then, nothing. Publicly, Malcolm Walker said very little. Privately, he exhaled for the first time in months. The mansion, once buzzing with tension, settled into something gentler, softer, as if the walls themselves were relieved. The lies were gone. Isabel noticed it first in the mornings. The way the air felt warmer, the way footsteps didn't echo as sharply, the way Malcolm no longer wore his glasses indoors, no longer needed the shield. He still moved carefully, thoughtfully, but the weight on his shoulders had shifted. Ella noticed it too. She began coming downstairs on her own again. She sat closer to Isabel at breakfast, lingering touches, quiet questions, watching her with a seriousness that felt far older than her years. One evening, after dinner, Isabel found Ella curled up on the couch beside her, feet tucked under her legs, fingers twisting nervously in the fabric of the pillow. Malcolm stood by the window across the room, pretending to read emails he'd already finished. "Isabel?" Ella asked softly. "Yes, sweetheart?" Ella hesitated, looked toward her father, then back at Isabel. "Can I ask you something?" Isabel smiled gently. "Of course." Ella's voice dropped to a whisper, as if afraid the question itself might break. "Can you be my mom?" The world stopped. Isabel felt the words hit her chest like a held breath finally released, and she didn't know what to do with the sudden ache that followed. "Oh, Ella," she whispered. Tears welled before she could stop them. Malcolm turned slowly. He saw Isabel's face, Ella's trembling hands. He crossed the room in 3 quiet steps and knelt in front of them, his voice careful, unsteady in a way Isabel had never heard before. "Sweetheart," he said. "You know Isabel can't replace your mother." Ella nodded quickly. "I know. I want her to stay. Forever." Silence stretched. Malcolm looked at Isabel then, not as an employer, not as a man who had been protected, but as someone standing at the edge of a life he didn't dare ask for. Isabel swallowed. She reached for Ella's hands, holding them gently. "I can't take your mom's place," she said softly. "But if you want, I can be here." For you. As long as you'll have me. Ella launched herself forward, arms wrapping tightly around Isabel's neck. Malcolm closed his eyes. Something inside him, something long sealed shut, broke open. Later that night, when the house was quiet again, Malcolm found Isabel in the kitchen, rinsing a mug she didn't need to wash. You didn't have to say that, he said quietly. She didn't turn around. I meant it. I know. He stepped closer, leaning against the counter beside her. I never planned for this, he admitted. I thought reclaiming the company would be enough. I thought justice would fix everything. Isabel glanced at him. Did it? He smiled faintly. No. She dried her hands slowly. What fixed it? Malcolm looked toward the hallway where Ella's room glowed softly with nightlight warmth. You, he said. Isabel's breath caught. And her, he added. And the way this house feels different now. He hesitated, then spoke again, more vulnerable this time. I don't know what comes next. I just know I don't want to face it without you. Isabel met his gaze. I never wanted anything from you, she said quietly. I still don't. Malcolm reached for her hand. Then stay, he said. Not as staff, not as protection. Just stay. She nodded. The mansion, once echoing and hollow, felt full, not of noise, but of life. Peace settles. But life always tests what matters most. Morning light filled the mansion differently now. It didn't creep in cautiously, as if unsure whether it was welcome. It spilled freely through the tall windows, warming the marble floors, catching dust motes in the air and turning them into something almost beautiful. Malcolm stood by the window in the living room, coffee untouched in his hand. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't wearing his dark glasses. He didn't need them anymore. Outside, the city moved the way it always had, fast, ambitious, hungry. The same city that had nearly taken everything from him. The same one that would soon be watching his every move again. He knew the silence wouldn't last forever, but for this moment, it was enough. Behind him, soft laughter echoed from the kitchen. Ella's laugh. Clear, unrestrained, alive. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, letting the sound settle deep in his chest. When he'd lost his sight, the world had gone dark in more ways than one. He'd learned how quickly respect turned into pity, how loyalty bent under the weight of opportunity, how easily people justified betrayal when they believed no one was watching. Blindness had shown him who was fake, but pretending not to see, that had shown him something else entirely. It had shown him Isabel. He turned just in time to see her crouched beside Ella at the kitchen table, helping her tie the ribbon on a small school project. Isabel's hair had slipped loose from its tie, falling softly around her face as she laughed at something. Ella whispered. No performance, no calculation, no audience, just love, given freely. Malcolm leaned against the doorway, watching. Every small gesture still struck him, the way Isabel listened fully, the way she spoke to Ella as if her thoughts truly mattered, the way she smiled without checking who might be watching. She had loved them both when she believed it would never be noticed. That realization still undid him. Daddy! Ella called suddenly, spotting him. Look! He walked closer, crouching beside them. That's amazing, he said honestly. You did a great job. Ella beamed, then darted off to grab something from her room, leaving Malcolm and Isabel alone in the quiet hum of the kitchen. Isabel straightened, brushing flour from her hands. She's excited, she said softly. I hope that's okay. Malcolm met her eyes. It's more than okay. There was a pause. Comfortable. Real. I've been thinking, Malcolm said finally. Isabel tilted her head slightly. That usually means something serious. He smiled faintly. It is. He leaned back against the counter, choosing his words carefully, not because he was afraid, but because this mattered. When I lost my sight, he began, I thought it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. Isabel listened, silent. I thought it took everything, my control, my power, my sense of safety. He exhaled, but it stripped away illusions too. It showed me how fragile everything I'd built really was. She nodded slowly. And when my sight returned, he continued, I thought pretending not to see would help me protect what I had left. He looked at her then. I didn't expect it to give me something better. Isabel's throat tightened. You never treated me like a broken man, Malcolm said quietly. You treated me like a person. You protected me when you didn't have to. You loved this house back to life when it had every reason to stay empty. She shook her head gently. I wasn't trying to save anything. I know, he said. That's the point. Silence stretched between them, filled with meaning instead of tension. I used to think seeing was about control. Malcolm went on. About knowing everything. Anticipating everyone. He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. But love, he said softly, looks like trust. It looks like kindness given without witnesses. It looks like choosing someone even when there's nothing to gain. Isabel felt tears prick her eyes, not sharp, not painful, just full. I didn't know you could see, she whispered. If I had, maybe I would have been afraid. Or maybe, Malcolm said gently, you would have still been you. She laughed softly through the emotion. Maybe. Footsteps padded back into the room. Ella slid between them, grabbing both their hands as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Malcolm looked down at her. Then back at Isabel. No glasses. No secrets. No pretending. Just the three of them. Standing in a house that finally felt like home. Outside, the city waited. There would be questions soon. Public scrutiny. Whispers about the scandal. About the woman who'd appeared at his side. About the child who smiled too brightly for a billionaire's heir. And beyond that, new enemies, new tests, new costs. Malcolm knew all of that. But as he looked at Isabel and Ella, he knew something else too. Whatever came next, they wouldn't face it alone. Love had already won once, and this time, they would protect it together. If this story moved you, don't stop here. Like this video. Subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who believes in real love. And comment where you're watching from, because what comes next will test their love, their family, and everything they fought to protect.